Welcome members of the Budget Committee and welcome to the public. We have two items on the agenda, two presentations. The first is the 2021 World Championship update. The second is the Urban Renewal Agency budget. Following that, we'll take a break and then have deliberations on some of the proposed motions. We'll now get started with the public comment on the fiscal year 18 proposed budget. Those wishing to speak during the public comment must have submitted a completed request to speak form to staff at the room entrance prior to the beginning of the public comment period. Please preface your statement with your name, city of residence, and for Eugene residents, your ward if known. You will have 3 minutes to comment. There are lights on the timer. The yellow light indicates that you have 30 seconds remaining, and the sound will indicate at the end of 3 minutes. We'll begin with Dana Peterson.
Hello, my name is Dana Peterson. I'm Eugene resident, Ward 5. I am the Deputy Program Manager for Shelter Care Supported Housing Program, and I'm here on behalf of my agency, our community partners, and the people that we serve. Last year we served 1,242 homeless individuals, and we would like to advocate for the continued funding for the Human Services Commission and to fund Dusk to Dawn. The city's contribution is essential to providing support to the growing demand on our community's safety net programs. And with today's instability, now is not the time to back off of safety net programs, and it's not the time for disinvestment. Homelessness affects our entire community and requires a community intervention. And by funding these safety net programs, we provide a path to stable housing. Access to stable housing leads to a decrease in other costs, such as health care and to law enforcement. By supporting our most vulnerable in our community, we add to our overall prosperity. I thank you for your past support and for our continued partnership. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Mike Cavan.
Mike Cavan with the Lane Professional Firefighters. First, I'd like to thank you for another opportunity to address this body on behalf of the 250 men and women represented by Local 851 in Eugene Springfield. And thank you for taking a closer look at the serious issue facing the ambulance transport system. I want to take a quick opportunity to address some concerns I had with perceived confusion with the committee on our comparison to Seattle. While I agree that we should aspire to the high quality system that's in process in Seattle, currently, it just doesn't fit the bill for what we're doing here in the community. Their ALS system is the premier in the country, responding to the most critical calls for service and are completely tax supported. The dispatch center's ability to triage medical calls far exceeds the capability of our own, which is a police-centric and no experienced fire and EMS supervision or true oversight in the center. For example, the approved expansion of the appropriate calls for BLS to help us expand the system has not been implemented, and it's been nearly 6 months since the request was made. The BLS ambulances at the Seattle Fire Department are not a cost-saving measure, rather staffed with firefighters whose primary mission is not for transport, but to relieve capacity for busy fire companies. The cost of a Seattle Aid car, ironically, is the same as the cost for one of our ALS ambulances at $1.3 million. They don't do the work that we do here, and they're a far cry from the limited duration and low-wage employees that are working to relieve our capacity problem. Seattle also has a tremendous number of private BLS ambulances that do the majority of the transport work, and so overall, I thought there was some confusion in ratios and how it works up there, and it's our opinion based off the facts that doesn't fit, and so I just didn't want that confusion to stick around. I'd also like to briefly address a question about the toll the additional call volume takes on our employees. I felt that it was a good question. We worked diligently to keep the focus on the community, because we're here to serve, because at the end of the day, it's about them and our ability to serve their need. As firefighters, we are proud of the work that we do and do not want to complain or make this about us. However, it's taking a toll on the mental health and career satisfaction of our members. This does present in the form of additional sick leave relating to long-term or illness or long-term fatigue, and in recent years, attrition problems. Over the last few years, and including 3 employees that will leave at the end of this month, we have lost 15 firefighters to other departments. It may not seem like a lot in a department our size. That type of attrition should be alarming. Many of these departures are a direct reflective of the effects of long-term fatigue in an overburdened system with no relief in sight. Some of the employees are commuting to the metro area for these jobs because they want to stay in our community. In the last 5 years, 5 recruitments, we saw an average of 256 applicants for these positions, and we now have 70.
Thank you. Next, we have Brian Weaver.
Hello, committee. I'm Brian Weaver, Ward 1, Eugene, obviously. I'm here to talk about Mr. Scove's open budget tool that he's proposed or is going to propose. I did look at the functions listed on his website, and they sound good. I mean, on the surface they sound good. I really wasn't clear. I couldn't understand what he was actually saying. You know, I do my own taxes. So I was a purchasing agent for about 6 years, so I'm not naive. I just wasn't sure what exactly was where it was going with it. But I think the point is I think it's insufficient because who's going to administer the tool? It's still going to come from the city, from the inside. To be totally independent, it needs to come from, you know, maybe a publicly elected city auditor or a performance auditor. And I gave staff flyers. You probably know that we've launched an initiative drive, collecting signatures, and put a ballot measure on the ballot with regard to the elected city auditor. Anyway, I think that's what needs to happen. It needs to come from a completely independent agency. The cost of that will be 0.12% of the city budget, and it's proven that outside city auditors saved a city about 5% of the budget, so it would pay for itself. You have to forgive me, my comments are a little bit disjointed. I just got off work. Yeah, I think that is the only way we're going to be able to restore trust in the city regarding expenditures. Judging by the last couple elections, the city fee was defeated. The city income tax was defeated. I just think that makes sense. And it would help I'll make this short, I think it would help the city council and the other budget committee members, the at-large people, better insight, better than just looking at a website with links and stuff. Because it seems like the city budget is getting more complicated with progressing years. Even Bonnie Bettman mentioned that. And city staff, I believe, is giving less information. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Please, you've got flyers. Oh, you already. Thank you so much.
Next, we have Pat Walsh.
Good evening. I'm Pat Walsh. I live in Councilor Syret's district. As chair of the Lane County Poverty and Homelessness Board, I'm here today to express concern about the status of funding for the Dusk to Dawn program and the Human Services Commission. I understand that the $154,000 of one-time state funding helped fund the Dusk to Dawn program this past winter. Dusk to Dawn is a successful lifeline for nearly 100 people per night who live on the streets during the wettest and coldest time of the year. For many, it's a first step toward participation in a Housing First program. Last year, 383 single individuals and 78 family members participated in these winter warming projects. Without Dusk to Dawn, these homeless citizens will be left out in the cold and the rain, and another important opportunity for the community to present paths to wellness will be lost. I'm concerned about the anticipated $125,000 reduction in the allocation to the Human Services Commission as well. I understand that this too was one-time funding. Reductions in the Human Services budget and Dusk to Dawn program will force the elimination or reduction of services to the homeless in our community. As many of you know, Mayor Venice has initiated an important conversation about the feasibility and the viability of a public low-barrier homeless shelter in this community. Until the city and nonprofit partners can determine where funding for a public low-barrier shelter will come from, and if a public shelter can be built, have sustainable funding sources, and be professionally operated, I encourage you to maintain or increase the $154,000 for the Dusk to Dawn program and the $125,000 for the Human Services Commission. Thank you, and I appreciate your consideration.
Thank you. Next, we have Jennifer Frenzer.
Hi, good evening. I'm Jennifer Frenzer-Knowlton, and I'm in Betty Taylor's ward. I wanted to reiterate the work group's input that we started last week on continuing to expand the outdoor programs that are providing shelter, such as the rest stops and Dusk to Dawn and the car camping, expanding car camping, and also providing some relief to Nightingale Health Sanctuary that converted temporarily to a car camp and could really use some help with their expenses. I'd also like to reiterate our request for seed money for planning and implementing indoor shelter programs. And I'm hoping that whatever source of this funding, it's something that can be spent in advance of the winter, and so that we're not, or during the winter, so we're not having to wait yet another winter without expanding our outdoor programs. So whether that means that we're looking at money going towards the reserve revenue shortfall fund, or however that mechanism is to make sure that money is actually allocated and spent right away instead of being delayed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have John Borofsky.
Thank you, Chair Nowicki. My name is John Borofsky, Ward 3. Hello, Budget Committee members. I sent an email to you earlier this week. I hope you all got that and had a chance to read it. I'm just going to kind of go over what my thoughts were on that. As you know, there's going to be several upcoming decision points that the City Council is going to need to be making regarding funding beyond these Budget Committee meetings. One of them, there was a work session this morning on the quiet zone and the opportunities for funding that. There's the possibility of a street repair bond being forwarded on this fall. There's work going on that. And obviously, there's the City Hall project, which is an ongoing type of a project. What I'm hoping that you folks would consider is, I know the city manager has contemplated putting some of the Comcast money towards the City Hall project. And while I feel that that is an appropriate use for one-time monies, I think there's also going to be some of these other projects that are also appropriate uses for one-time monies. So rather than putting a big chunk of it in for the City Hall at this point, possibly put it aside into a separate thing, or keep it in the reserve for revenue shortfall to be allocated at a later date, perhaps in a supplemental budget, for some of these other needs. Because, just to be honest with you, once it goes into a fund, it's really hard to get it out of that fund, because people will say, well, we voted on that and we've decided that that money is for City Hall or whatever the thing. Whereas if it's in its own fund or still remains in the reserve for revenue shortfall, we know that that fund money can be used for one-time expenses. I think that the quiet zone is a very appropriate use for some of the Comcast money. It is one-time money, one-time expenses, expenses that will benefit the community as a whole, but not be a drain on ongoing funding. So it was articulated in the letter that I sent you I appreciate all you guys' hard work. I know that appropriating priorities is a really difficult position to be in. But I think if you set some of this aside and give council a little bit of flexibility on some of these upcoming things, because if you try and put this in with the street bond thing, it could torpedo the street bonds. So just some thoughts for you to think about. And thanks for your work.
Thank you. And finally, we have David Monk.
Thank you. I'm David Monk. I'm a Ward 2 resident. I wanted just to make a quick comment about Mr. Scove's proposal, because I'm really excited by the prospects of that. I mean, what that could mean to the work that you all do. So, so it seems to me that while I hope you all are likewise supportive of that online resource, I would encourage you not to take funding from sister cities and neighborhood associations to fund that. I would hope you'd look at the general fund if it means enough to you as budget committee members to access that information and have it accessible to you and to be able to tease apart the numbers and to do your work. I think it's a fabulous tool, and I'm really pleased that Josh brought that forward to y'all. It seems to me that kind of information should have been accessible to you all along. And granted, this is kind of a new online tool perhaps, and it would have taken a great deal of effort for the city staff to allow you all to access the information in the way that it seems like this online tool will do. I'm really pleased that that proposal's out, and I hope you all will support it. The thing is that I wanted to say in addition to that is I think there's a lack of trust from citizens in our community with their local government. And I think this will help, but I don't think it will perhaps be sufficient. I know that you all are very busy people. You're volunteering your time. And you have expertise that may allow you to tease out these numbers and participate in this process in a meaningful way. I think a lot of citizens will not. I know that when I just looked at the proposal, I didn't even understand some of the terminology. So I think for a lot of folks, that's not going to be sufficient. And that's why a local group of folks, myself being one, have invited Gary Blackmer, he's the former Portland City Auditor, to come to Eugene. He'll be here in this very room a week from today at 6 o'clock, speaking to how auditing can improve city government. And I really hope that if you all have the time for that event, that you will come. I think there'll be a lot to be gained by it. Thank you much.
Thank you. Thanks. Thanks to everyone that made public comments tonight. We'll now move to our minutes approval. I want to check in with Garrett to see if he's on the line. Okay, with that, in your packet there are minutes from the May 3rd meeting. Are there any recommended changes or comments? If not, do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second. All in favor? All opposed? Everyone, unanimous vote. Motion's approved. I'll turn the floor over to our Assistant City Manager for a presentation on the World Championship Games.
I just came from hi, I'm Sarah Maderi, Assistant City Manager. I just came from a presentation that the Eugene Springfield Chamber Leadership Group did on 2021, and they wore these fancy headbands when they did it, and so I thought maybe I should do that to just lighten it up a little bit, but they dared me, so I did it.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm going to just do a little bit of framing about Tracktown before we jump into 2021, because I think it's hard to talk about 2021 without getting a little bit of grounding in why this is important to our community. And most people, when they think about our legacy of track and field, they point back to kind of the 70s, and it was really that perfect intersection of Bill Bowerman, the coach, Steve Prefontaine, and eventually Phil Knight, and the innovation that happened there. And each one of these people embodied excellent leadership. They were all high performers, and they were all very innovative. And I think that perfect intersection of the three is what kind of blew up or blossomed Tracktown and Legacy. And it's really what's at the core of Nike, and it's also at the core of of a lot of our innovation. And if you, any of you attended the high-speed fiber kickoff in the Minor building, apparently Nike still rents space in that, and the original waffle iron may indeed be in that building. And I think that says a lot about Eugene and the types of people that are drawn to this community. Bill Bowerman was able to recruit Steve Prefontaine from Coos Bay with really a very simple promise, and that was that he would make him the greatest long-distance runner ever. And that's really all it took for him. And that's what he said. It's all it took. And he believed in that. And I think Steve Prefontaine had a really strong reputation for being a very, very hard worker and also a bit of a rebel, and is known for being kind of the first person that made running cool. If you read through history, you'll read a lot about up until the day that Steve Prefontaine started running, a lot of people ran because they weren't big enough to play football. And now it's really turned it around. I actually think that I made running cool. This is just proof. This is just proof that in the early 70s, track was so cool. It was even cool in Fort Worth, Texas, and we took it very seriously there too. In fact, I can remember my brother's first pair of waffle shoes. He ran the 800, and it was everyone came to look at them.
Pippi Longstocking.
So we were, I struggle with this, was it luck or was it destiny? And there's a great quote that I've used recently by Bertice Berry that says, when you walk with purpose, you collide with destiny. And I think that's what happened then, and I think it's continuing to happen. And we see that even today with Vin Lanana and his continued vision and leadership for what this can do for the sport in the world, what it can do in this country, and especially what it can do in this community. So speaking of that, I think that's been a real gift. And I think that's kind of the framework that I'd like to think about when we think about the gift of 2021. So let's just talk a little bit about what that is. So what are the World Championships? The World Championships are really the jewel in the crown of the IAAF is the International Association of Athletics Federation. It's a global competition program. It was started in 1983, and my understanding of the beginning of it was up until that point, the Olympics had been seen as the world, like that's your world championship, and the IAAF wanted something different and something their own where they could just come and really, really compete strongly in this area. So they started in 1983, started in Helsinki, and they, on any given year, are the third most popular sporting event in the world. And on some years, they're the most popular sporting event in the world. And so happens that in 2021, that will be one of those years because the Olympics won't be happening, the World Cup won't be happening. So everyone in the world will be looking to this to be the premier sporting event for everything. The other thing that's really interesting is that it's never been held in the United States before. So this will be not only the most important, but it'll be the first time ever that this country has hosted it. A few facts about that, and I think a couple things we know. The event's been named and approved by IAAF as Oregon 21. This is the first time an event has not had the city in the name, so it's important, and I think Vin would tell you it's really important that it doesn't just say Eugene 21 because it is something that they need a lot of excitement around the state, and I think it has an opportunity to showcase the state and will be really important for our country. So Oregon 21 it is. We know the dates are August 6th through the 15th of 2021. We know that there'll be 9 days of competition. As you can see, there's over 200 countries that will participate. There's over 2,000 athletes. As a comparison, there's about 1,000 athletes that come for the Olympic trials and probably another 500 coaches. I'm not sure how many coaches come for this, but I would imagine it's proportional. 3,000 media and broadcasters, and I believe in 2016 we had about 450 credentialed media people here as part of the trials. And we'll have over 6 billion TV viewers in over 200 countries looking at Eugene, Springfield, and Oregon. So just to give you a sense of scale of that, in 2015, the world champs were in Beijing. Beijing has a population of 21.5 million. Here's a bird's eye view. This year in August, it'll be held in London. London has a population of 8.7 million. And just a little side note, they had over 1 million people put in a bid to get tickets. And so they have, I think, 700,000 total available. And they have already too many people that want them. in 2 more years, and it will be in Doha, and Doha has a population of about 2.6 million. And then they'll come to Eugene, which makes total sense because our population is 157,000. Often when I talk about this, people ask about the new Hayward Field renovation and how many people can that really seat. And so just while we're on this slide, I'll say the current capacity at Hayward is about 10,500 of regular seating before they expand like they do for the trials. The permanent seating that's being expanded as part of the renovation, I believe, takes them to about just a little over 12,000, with an opportunity to put in temporary seatings that will get them to 30,000, I believe, and that will be for events just like this one. So that's kind of a big deal. So how we'll prepare, you know, there's 2 things I think we're kind of preparing for that are happening at the same time. One is the event. So I'm going to talk about that first. The next slide, I'll talk more about community legacy. You know we have a really great momentum going with the organizing, partnerships, and leadership that have happened around the 2008, 12, and 16 Olympic trials. It's not that it's won't be a whole new, different level of challenge, but there is a real rhythm and depth of relationships that I think is obviously why we were selected to be able to do this with the capacity of the city. Those partnerships include all the city, you know, all the local agencies, including LTD and eWeb and the University of Oregon and Travel Lane County. I mean, you pretty much know who those players are, and as we move into this, it will be a statewide partnership as well, and probably even some federal partnership to be included as well. Tracktown right now has a draft mission out. I don't think that they've published this yet, but their mission is that they will engage communities throughout Oregon and the United States, innovate how the world experiences sport, and be a global platform for advancing diverse programs that leave a lasting legacy. The community legacy. Now this is where, if you turn in your budget book, there's a kind of a 1-pager, 2-pager on this on page 42. You don't have to look at it now. This is just going to go over that a little bit. We see that there's 4 areas to really focus, and one of them is really around building community. As you talk about this event, people get very excited, people have ideas. In fact, I did just come from that chamber leadership group, and their entire class project was around 2021 and how do we use that to continue continuing the momentum we have in both downtown Eugene and Springfield. And when they were tasked with trying to find what is something that we can all collectively work on that will take both cities up, this was the thing that they saw as being that item, that you could uniquely do that. And they've come up with a pretty interesting set of goals themselves. So when you start thinking about this, is a group of 28 local, you know, talented leaders that are already saying, hey, we've got some ideas and we have some goals. And every group I talk to has that similar kind of reaction to this event. So we know that this is a way for our community to start thinking about positive things they can do. Investing in ourselves, we're talking about, yes, we're hosting a world event, and yes, there'll be things that come of that, but there's also a lot of ways in which we want that to be a lasting legacy in our community. So a lot of things that we talk about, when you start talking about what's important, people often will talk about the triangle between downtown, the river, the new Knight campus, and campus Hayward Field, and that there's a very exciting energy that can happen there. And so we see that as an opportunity, like, let's leverage that. We know we want to redevelop the riverfront. We're already working on that, and this is when we should be using events like this to move us forward. Showcasing Eugene. I'm going to use a quote that Vin used in some of his stuff, which was, we look forward to working with our partners at the IAAF and USA Track and Field to deliver an exceptional event, one that reflects not only Oregon's tremendous track and field heritage, but also its innovative businesses and industry, stunning natural beauty, and warm and welcoming communities. And I can't think of a better place to showcase that than right here in Eugene, where the event will be. And then inspire the world. This is really about what are people's experiences when they're here? What do they see? What do they learn? What do they take home? What are their memories? We do a lot of really great things in this community, and we feel like we have solutions to world-class problems, and we have a lot of innovative solutions to world-class problems, and so we hope that we can use this to help inspire the world. So back to the budget piece. Last year we had put into the budget as you recall, $500,000 that was really a placeholder that we saw as being necessary to be ready for kind of strategic investments. And that was similar to what we've done in the past. As you recall, during the, if you don't recall, during the recession, we had done some similar kind of one-time dollar holds to be able to do economic development investments as they came up in places where we knew they would be timely. You would ask that we not do that. We put it in reserves and committed that we would come back with kind of a plan of exactly where we would invest that money, and that's still the plan. But I wanted to say that there's some things out there that people are already talking about, one of which is important and timely will be if we want to host anything outside of the event fence. So for example, sometimes like during the Olympic trials, they'll do the hammer throw like at the Nike campus. Last year they did the race walk in Salem. Something like that needs to be kind of developed and ready to go by this summer, and we may need to make some sort of commitments to that. And so there's some talk of maybe something in the downtown area of a way of kind of broadening the scope of how people can access this event, because one of our top goals has always been equity and access, and that everyone in the community has an ability to participate in this. Other things are around IT investments, citywide IT investments. How are people going to get around? How are they going to get information? Potentially community grants. How do individual neighborhoods make improvements in ways that welcome the world? And then what the city executive team did was we sat down and said, well, when we're preparing these, what do we want to give direction to staff in terms of what they might propose? And we said, we want to create an awesome Eugene experience and develop and invest in a legacy. And you can see that of infrastructure, service quality and capacity, community and organizational culture, and leadership and relationships. And interestingly, that's the group I just came from said they think that could be, as next to infrastructure, the leadership and relationships and how we talk to each other and about ourselves is probably the second biggest legacy they saw coming out of something like this. So that was really the intent, to jumpstart some key initiatives. So what's next? Tracktown right now has been doing a lot of outreach with stakeholders and running their draft mission statement by understanding what are our high priority items and initiatives we're hoping that might happen in the next 4 years, so they can kind of come together over the summer and refine what their key strategic objectives will be for the overall event. So that's happening, and we're working very closely with them, and we can continue to keep people updated on what they land on. We're kind of following with them in terms of coordinating, developing our own coordination across all the city departments. As you know, we're doing a lot of work that's very 2021 oriented, and so making sure that we're tracking all those, that we're communicating them, and that we're being really clear what the funding needs are going to be, and we're unclear about that. So we're both from an event standpoint and from a legacy standpoint. We plan to come back to the council this fall, if not late summer. And then in terms of the lots underway, I think, a lot of people are talking about 2021. We're doing a lot of projects like the project for public spaces, the improvements to downtown. We're moving forward with the riverfront. All of those things are 2021. So when people start getting nervous and saying, when are we going to start? When are we going to start? Nothing's happening. It's like there's a lot that's happening this 2021. It's just not under that heading and brand just yet. And with that, I'm going to just, there's a ceremony that happens every time that one of the cities hands off to the next. And so this is the Beijing London handover, and it gives you kind of an idea of the size of the crowd, the excitement, the momentum, and know that there will be a year where Doha's handing over to us, and there will be something very similar to this. Actually, I think I need to pull it back. kind of exciting to think about Hayward Field in that photo. And that's that. Oh, sorry. Recording not done.
One more time, everybody.
Excited about that.
Awesome.
Thank you. We'll forego the round robin in the interest of time, and we'll move directly to a queue for those that have questions about the presentation. I see we have one question. Yes, Councilor Surratt.
So it was mentioned in one of the bullet points that the city's looking at potential infrastructure coordinating with the planning group working on the World Championship. So I'm assuming, and like confirmation, that there's some plan to either implement a process for looking at how we might spend those funds and come to council and make some recommendations. Is that the plan? Okay, great.
Josh?
Yeah, well, and just a quick clarification, and I really appreciate the presentation. This is exciting. My motion last year regarding the $500,000 that was set aside was not saying don't do that. It was also not asking for a plan. You sort of implied, and I'm just nitpicking just for the audience. It wasn't saying have a plan. I understand you need tremendous flexibility to prepare for something that has all sorts of unforeseen pieces. It was simply to articulate criteria by which the money would be spent. So I just want to be clear. I feel like we should all be prepared to, be flexible. I mean, goodness gracious, if ever there were a one-time thing or one-time money, and we needed to be flexible for, this is it. But it was more, in the spirit of the comments about trust and city expenditures, was really just have clear criteria by which we would do it. And I think you've articulated some of it here, especially with the legacy piece, but that's all.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, sure. Thanks.
Since we have no further questions, we'll move on to our Urban Renewal Agency budget presentation by our Planning and Development Director.
Hard to follow a headband-worthy presentation.
I know. Do you want to borrow it? It's always hard to follow a video.
We have a video.
I like the childhood photos. You got any of those, Danny?
So good evening. I'm Denny Bro. I'm Planning and Development Director. And this evening we're going to provide a really brief overview of the Urban Renewal Agency budget. And we're going to try to keep it simple. We were here in March and we presented information about how urban renewal works in general. Historically, the urban renewal part of the budget really has not been a primary focus for the Budget Committee, but we've received some feedback earlier that you would like the opportunity to review and discuss the urban renewal budget, so that's why we're here. As you recall, there's two urban renewal districts, the Downtown District and the Riverfront District. I'm going to briefly talk about budget amounts for specific projects within each one of these districts. And then Maurizio will talk more about the overall urban renewal budget. So starting with the Downtown Urban Renewal District, there's actually only 4 projects approved in the current Downtown Urban Renewal Plan. The Downtown Fiber Project, Farmers Market, Park Blocks and Open Space, and the old LCC building. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each one of these and some budget implications. First of all, the Downtown Fiber Project, and Sarah talked about inspiring the world in 2021, and she used the term solutions to world-class problems. Our fiber project is a really good example of a solution to not only a world-class problem, but a world-class opportunity. A large portion of the project area is within our Downtown Urban Renewal District, and the downtown plan allows up to $3 million of spending for this project. And there's approximately $2.2 million budgeted for fiber in fiscal year 18, which is basically what remains of the $3 million available in the downtown plan. The project's already underway. You may have seen eWeb installing orange microduct tubing around town, and that's the actual tubing that will carry the fiber. Fiber has been ordered. It will be installed throughout the rest of this year and early into next year, but we're expecting the project to be completed in FY18. You'll also see when we get to Riverfront, there's a couple $100,000 for fiber in the Riverfront Urban Renewal District because a small area of the fiber project territory or area is within the Riverfront District, not the downtown district. The farmers market for fiscal year 18, there are actually no additional expenditures proposed for the farmers market project. The farmers market, as you know, is tied to the City Hall project and the county butterfly lot negotiations. So we anticipate that there will be urban renewal funded staff work on this project, but no capital projects expended or projects identified in fiscal year 18. Our parks, blocks, and open space work really includes implementation of recommendations from our work with Project for Public Spaces, which we talked about at an earlier session. This is are consistent with the recommendations from PPS. This summer, we'll be testing some lighter, quicker, cheaper improvements. We're going to basically learn from what we do this summer, listen to the community, get some feedback from the community, and then move towards more permanent solutions to various public spaces such as the park blocks and Broadway Plaza. So there's $300,000 budgeted in fiscal year 18 for this activity, which really captures the cost of early design work that we believe will need to occur before we have discussions with the Urban Renewal Agency Board, the City Council, as they consider more permanent improvements to those public spaces. The old LCC building is in the plan, and our approach with the old LCC building is kind of similar in that we haven't budgeted for any capital expenditures in FY18. You'll see $50,000, and that $50,000 really is targeted for feasibility and design work as we look to how to transform this building into that innovation hub. In addition to the amounts that are budgeted to support specific projects, there are also project delivery costs that you'll see in the budgets for both of the urban renewal districts. Urban renewal activities are carried out by city staff in the Planning and Development Department. The Urban Renewal Agency actually doesn't have any employees. So generally, the agency pays for city staff that are dedicated to Urban Renewal Agency activities, as well as space costs, overhead, legal services, etc. And this is all captured in project delivery costs, which is budgeted within both urban renewal districts. Moving to the Riverfront Urban Renewal District, again, Sarah mentioned the kind of world-class legacy opportunity for the Riverfront, and so this is really fast becoming a priority focus area. And our recent agreement to purchase the property from eWeb is even accelerating that to a greater extent. There was $6.875 million approved in SB1 Capital Fund. And I would just note that the actual purchase price that we negotiated with eWeb is $5.75 million, but the approved amount will be carried forward in the FY18 budget, because we expect the closing of that sale with eWeb to occur later this calendar year. SB1 also included in the Riverfront District $100,000 to be used as matching funds for the Bike Share Capital Investment Program, our project, and this amount will be carried over in FY18, which is when this project is expected to kick off a little bit later this year. There's also $50,000 in FY18 for transportation analysis and design work for our Willamette to Willamette project. And that really is an effort to upgrade 8th Avenue between Willamette Street and the river as we move towards our vision for riverfront redevelopment. And there's also, again, I mentioned the $200,000 for the fiber project. Again, that's the share of the project that's within the Riverfront Urban Renewal District. So at this point, Richo is going to provide a quick snapshot of the overall Urban Renewal Agency budget, and we may even have a video at the end of it that hopefully will inspire the world. So Sarah might have to put her headband back on for that.
All right, thanks, Denny. So I'm going to walk us through a couple of slides that summarize the FY18 proposed URA budget. The chart you see here was presented by the city manager at the April 26th Budget Committee meeting. Total FY18 proposed budget expenditures for both districts is $12.2 million. Please note this amount includes a $2.9 million interfund transfer, which we'll discuss in more detail on the next slide. Thus, the net budget would be $9.3 million. Each district also has its own capital projects fund. These capital projects funds are not reflected here because no additional URA capital budget authority is being proposed at this time. Capital funding that was previously approved, as Denny mentioned earlier, but remains unspent, will continue to roll forward from year to year and will be reflected in the FY18 adopted budget. Now let's take a look at the budget details for each of the funds you see here. Let's start on the left side with the downtown district. The proposed expenditures for the downtown general fund are just over $5.2 million. This amount includes $2.9 million in support of the 2016 plan amendment projects that Denny covered earlier. Regarding high-speed fiber, I'd like to note that $3 million was appropriated during Supplemental Budget 1 in December of 2016. As Denny mentioned, it was estimated that up to $850,000 may be spent in the current fiscal year. Thus, the remaining $2.15 million is included in the FY18 proposed budget. The Downtown General Fund budget also includes $2.3 million available to be loaned out for the Downtown Revitalization Loan Program. All available funds are budgeted for the loan pool, but actual loan activity may vary. As you see, as indicated by the arrow there, the Downtown Debt Service Fund includes a $2.9 million interfund transfer to the Downtown General Fund in order to cover eligible plan expenses with tax increment revenue. This transfer is needed because the Downtown Debt Service Fund receives the tax increment revenue for the downtown district. The proposed budget for this fund also includes $314,000 to make the final payment on the debt associated with the Broadway Place garages and the LCC downtown campus from the 2010 plan amendment. Now let's move on to the Riverfront District on the right. The proposed expenditures for the Riverfront General Fund are approximately $500,000 to support the projects that Denny covered earlier. The Riverfront Program Revenue Fund in the lower right corner includes almost $3.2 million available to be loaned out for the Riverfront Renewal Loan Program. You may have noticed this is a large increase over the current fiscal year budget of $1 million for this program. The additional funding was simply moved out of the reserve in order to make more money available for loans. This is in anticipation of increased activity in the Riverfront District driven by the pending eWeb property purchase. Now we'll wrap up with a short but awesome video about the Riverfront redevelopment.
A long-held and cherished vision of reconnecting the city to the river it was founded on, creating a new...
We'll go back. You don't want to miss it.
You don't want to miss it.
It's teeny, isn't it? Those graphics are just too...
A long-held and cherished vision of reconnecting the city to the river it was founded on, creating a new world-class park and a thriving riverfront district along the Willamette River, all now within reach. The city of Eugene has agreed to purchase and help redevelop the eWeb riverfront. 14 acres of waterfront property near the heart of downtown where the city meets the river.
Redeveloping the eWeb property is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for our community. It's also an opportunity to create a new downtown neighborhood, an inviting place for the entire community, and it's an exciting and vital place for people to live, work, play, and to explore.
Once completed, this currently underused area will include new streets, paths, and public amenities, a variety of housing in a vibrant neighborhood, a 3-acre riverfront park with more area set aside for open spaces for the community to enjoy, as well as the adaptive reuse of the site's historic steam plant. This project also supports another lasting community vision, a redevelopment that utilizes 8th Avenue to connect Willamette Street to the Willamette River.
Our community traces its origins to the river, and the eWeb property is a place where the downtown and the Willamette River connect.
This property has a very historic place in Eugene's history. Where we're standing right here on the Willamette River is where Eugene Skinner set up his first ferry to ferry citizens across the river and back. Further up the property here was where the first water filtration plant built in Eugene was located.
Partnering with prospective developers, the city will ensure the redevelopment fulfills the eWeb Riverfront Master Plan, a blueprint originally drafted with input from more than 1,000 community members.
eWeb is very proud to have participated and supported an inclusive citizen process in the development of the master plan for this property.
With so many involved and invested, this project will serve as a source of pride for decades to come. Indeed, it will become a signature element of our community's identity. It will offer a lasting image for the world when millions of people across the globe focus on Eugene in 2021, when our community hosts the World Track and Field Championships, the largest sporting event in the world that year, and a lasting legacy in our community for generations to come.
Back over to you.
Thank you. That was a great video.
So many things to say.
Again, we'll open up the queue for any questions, comments on the last presentation. Josh?
Thank you. I won't go into a bunch of details on this, but just a few quick questions on the urban renewal budget. I know we've talked in the past about figuring out the point at which the fiber network downtown, regardless of the ownership, public or public-private, or with various contracting and so on, we want to get to the point where it is somehow self-sustaining, and we don't just have more and more capital costs. Everything that I think has happened to date is strategic and important, and I'm totally supportive. But I'm just curious, when do we start getting a sense of what the business model is for that, so we know that it is a self-sustaining system? And so, you know what I mean? So it isn't something we're always investing in the same way, but it becomes a financially sustainable entity.
Yeah, I think there's two sides of that. There's the upfront capital expenditure, which of course the Urban Renewal Agency is making a big part of that. It's not just Urban Renewal Agency funds. We've applied for grants, EDA grant, and specifically that we hope to supplement those. So that's a mix of funds, but I think with the public investment up front, I think the downtown model is a sustainable model as far as an operating model. It's really capturing the upfront capital cost of putting the infrastructure in. That has been the challenge, I think, that we've solved in an economic way with eWeb by utilizing conduit that's already under the ground that we co-locate fiber along with eWeb. So we found an efficient way to do it. I think it gets a little bit more complicated as you get outside of the downtown where utilities aren't underground and so forth. So we haven't gone that route yet to look at the barriers and challenges and costs with taking it outside of downtown. Once we perfect the downtown project, I think that's the next phase really, but we're not doing that work yet.
Okay, that's helpful. I mean, I guess just for councilors, especially who are president and the mayor, I would just ask you to keep asking that question, because the capital costs are doable with the funds we have at our disposal for little pieces of downtown, but we would never be able to fund the rollout community-wide. But we could partner with somebody who could, and so I think figuring out what that model is and our piece in it should be, a question we're asking ourselves over time. So my second and incredibly final question is, you showed and really focused on the piece of the riverfront that absorbed the master planning energy, but the boundary goes all the way over, another mile to the east. And I'm just wondering if you can comment briefly on the connection to the Knight campus, seeing as it's right there. It seems like, and I don't know if you have the map of the entire district, but it's on page 156 of the FY18 proposed budget.
Yes, the Riverfront District goes generally all the way to I-5 on the north side of Franklin Boulevard, so it does capture really the entire riverbank, which is very important. And I think when we think about the public park along the eWeb riverbank, we're really thinking more broadly of how do we have that open space really go all throughout the university district, all the way to I-5, so that there's really a connected, cohesive path, beautiful world-class riverfront throughout this whole area. And that's, if you've heard us refer to the river districts, that's really what we're talking about. Glenwood's a district, the university is a district, eWeb downtown's a district, and making kind of a path that really connects all of those districts together. So it's not, our focus area is not limited to eWeb right now. It is a big focus area because we're about to own the property. Franklin Boulevard is the other part of that equation that becomes very important. We've made major investments in MX and things, other things, and with the nice night campus that really elevates kind of the importance of Franklin Boulevard as a gateway between the university and downtown. And so we're not talking about specific investments along Franklin, but I could see that coming in the future along with night campus and rethinking Franklin Boulevard.
Well, but I guess just maybe to flesh that out a little bit, what, I mean, that, the proposed timeline they have is pretty ambitious, and I think they're going to be, you know, $50 or $100 million of real estate investment, right? I mean, new buildings right there to the north of Franklin in the next couple of years, right?
Yeah, and I think that number's bigger than 50.
No, but I mean just on a very short time frame, much bigger over time. But I guess I'm just curious, what is, you know, how are we supposed to think about that in the context of the urban renewal district? And yeah, say a little bit about that.
I mean, we are thinking about it, and I think it's really about how do we connect these places and connect the night campus to the waterfront, the downtown eWeb waterfront, connect the night campus to downtown, and how do we make those connecting points? And, you know, the riverbank is one of them. Franklin Boulevard is one of them. So we're talking about gateway entrances to the university and gateway entrances to downtown, and, you know, filling in the kind of the missing teeth between the night campus and downtown to make a better connection and really invite people to come downtown and invite people to come to the university that are downtown. So I think that's the night campus is kind of new, so we haven't really planned out what happens along Franklin, but I think it's probably going to become a high priority as that project comes forward.
Thank you.
It's a good question.
Next we have Councilor Clark.
Thank you. Over time, I've had an idea about how to tie those pieces together, but I'm going to put that aside for today and not go into that too much. One of the things that strikes me about your presentation, Sarah, and all of that lovely video about the center of our community that we just saw on the riverfront, all of it screams innovation, all of it. And so I think that when we're asking ourselves, what's the message we're presenting to the world, is that it's not just that this is a place that's a center of innovation, because what the university's doing with the campus and who we are over time with Prefontaine and with Nike, with all of it, we have a culture of innovation. I think the question we should be asking ourselves is, how do we, as a city organization, as the city, plug into the idea of a culture of innovation and showcase that in our plans for what we do in that area over the next few years? I know this is bigger than just this budget year, but how do we showcase that we live a culture of innovation there? I think the high-speed stuff, you know, the gig fiber is part of that, and expanding that is part of it. But what do we do with it, and how do we leverage other stuff in that area that makes best use of that, so that other people can see it in the world and say, wow, I want to plug into what they're doing there because it makes sense with what we do way over here. And it could be, you know, I think that this is bigger than just this year's budget and URD, but a bigger discussion over time about how we showcase and how we leverage a culture of innovation, and especially in that particular geographic area and those connection points. So I'm excited to see what we do with that area. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? with that, in anticipation of a fantastic conversation, take a break for 10 minutes, and we'll come back at 6:40. Thank you.
When do you have to go?
That's growing up in Eugene. Right? That's Eugene.
so cool.
A Bike Friday at 10 and a half.
These chairs can get away from you. Does it taste like that?
It will now begin moving through the proposed motions. We'll begin with the one-time funding requests. The author of the motion will have 3 minutes to speak, talk about why they support it, and just give us more information if necessary about the proposed motion. We do have those in our packet. We should have read them and be prepared afterwards to ask questions. After we've gone through all the motions, we'll have our city manager speak to the impacts of those motions, and then we'll move into the round robin, beginning on our left with Councilor Semple. Then we'll continue that. Afterwards, we'll move into a queue. So with that, we'll begin with Ken. You have a motion.
I do. My motion for one-time funds is to increase the general fund ongoing allocation to HSC by, I've got the wrong one, sorry.
Yeah, one time.
I'm really well organized here. That didn't go off my time, did it? All right. This motion is to allocate $154,655 on a one-time basis to provide Eugene's share of FY18 costs for dusk to dawn winter warming. My proposal includes that city funding would initially come from the reserve for revenue shortfall, with direction to the city manager to restore that reserve using marginal beginning working capital in the supplemental budget. The Dusk to Dawn project, which began this last year in FY17, was developed by the Poverty and Homelessness Board, Lane County staff, and some of the local providers. And it's a joint effort by Eugene and Springfield and Lane County, and it's to help mitigate illness and hypothermia amongst unsheltered homeless people by providing safe low barrier warming sites for singles and for families during the winter months, specifically November through March. Dusk to Dawn for singles, they use a mesh style tent. These are heated and they're staffed with overnight support. The Dusk to Dawn for families was hosted last year at the Mission site in some vacant space, which I understand is not available this coming winter. The family side offers overnight staff support, access to bathrooms, semi-private space for families that need to get off the street. The project expenses in this effort include overnight staff support, their supplies, portable restrooms, insurance, and rent. Initial funding last year came from a one-time State of Oregon grant, and that's not expected to be available or to be renewed in FY18. The total cost for the program is estimated at $205,500. It's proposed to be shared by Eugene, Springfield, and the county. The sharing is based on percentages that represent each jurisdiction's share of homeless population based on the Lane County Management Information System. And that split is Eugene at $154,600, Springfield at $27,500, and Lane County at $23,300. So I'm intending to make that motion in 2 weeks, and assuming I get a second and some discussion, this would appreciate your consideration, appreciate your support.
Thank you. The author of our next motion is Councilor Semple, and you actually have the next one after that. So we'll give you 3 minutes if you need it, and then we'll give you another 3 minutes when you move to the second.
Sorry to read. I'll be much quicker than that. My first motion for ambulance, I put because I wanted to make sure we talked about it. And there's no way to know what other motions were coming in. And I thought this was a bare minimum. Since there's 2 other motions, I would like to remove this one. Keep things simpler. My second motion to allocate $1 million of Comcast money for homeless shelter community center seed money and continued increased support for Rest Stop, Dusk to Dawn, and other shelter first emergency options. There was also a good discussion about that last time. I feel that there's a general movement towards we have to do something. And I got emails saying, let's make it $2 million. I wouldn't stand in the way of that, but I think $1 million is a good, definite, statement and putting our money where our talk is. So I hope there will be support, because it's not just our homeless that need it, but the general population has had it. So let's help them somehow. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our one-time funding requests. Moving into our combination one-time and ongoing requests. We'll begin with Josh.
All right, thank you. There's a lot here. I'll try to move quickly, but I hope there are questions on this. So I think you saw the proposal. It's in the packet. Fund a website that would present our budget clearly in a non-technical way, in a totally open way to anyone who has a web browser. That's the basic idea. And I provided the example of Redmond, Washington, but there are others out there. If people want to see others, please let me know. Let me just quickly talk about the rationale for the project, the rationale for the funding, and then a couple of quick comments. For the project, what's the rationale? And this really overlaps with David Monk's comments in public comment, which I appreciated very much. This is about rebuilding trust. There are a few narratives out there in the community about, that essentially narratives of mistrust about city government and the way we spend money. And ultimately, you can't really talk people out of this. I think the way to get through this is transparency and as much sort of demonstrated goodwill as possible, and this strikes me as a pretty basic one. I also think we could raise the quality of discussion in the community simply by having more information more easily accessible. I think it's sort of a standing, not a joke exactly, but I think people know you serve on the budget committee for a while before you actually understand the budget. And that's because it's complex, and we don't get to spend all of our time on it, and also it takes a while for it to percolate. And I think we could fast track that and make it more accessible to more people in the community. And then finally, I actually think it overlaps with Councilor Clark's comment about innovation. This is a very simple but sort of web-enabled way to advance transparency. I have to tell you, I think this will be table stakes in the future. This will be an expectation. This is not going to be a fancy thing. This is going to be what everybody is doing, and if you're not doing it, you'll be a laggard. So I'd prefer that we not get to be a laggard. So quickly, the rationale for the funding, this is a draft. There are very few role models. I'll just point out to budget committee members and councilors, there have been very few examples in my 3 years on the budget committee where people actually funded their proposals. So if this didn't quite hit the mark, I encourage people to offer amendments. There is a one-time piece of this, a ramp up. So I have that as one-time funding. The ongoing pieces I took solely from areas where we had increased funding in previous years. This still leaves both neighborhood associations and the sister cities budget with significantly more than they had before. And I think this is very much in line, even though only $25 to $100 is coming from the neighborhood budgets. I will remind everyone of the long conversation we had about equity and access and inclusion in the context of neighborhood newsletters a couple of years ago, and that often money doesn't get spent to reach out to a lot of neighborhoods. This is something that would automatically reach out to everybody. So I encourage you to think about it that way. I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you, Josh. Next, we have John.
Thank you. I will be putting forward a motion for the Budget Committee to amend the City Manager's proposed budget to fund one additional 24-hour ALS medic unit, two additional 24-hour BOS medic units instead of the currently proposed one 12-hour, and $500,000 of one-time funds for the acquisition of the two new ALS-capable medic units. I've outlined some specific budget adjustments to fully fund the approximately $2,299,000 of ongoing funds, which would be necessary to allocate the funding of the ongoing cost for the medic units above what was proposed. The $500,000 of one-time funds should come from the reserve for revenue shortfall. This proposal will follow the recommendations of the 2017 EMS workload analysis presented by the BLS program manager. It follows the GIS emergency services response capabilities analysis from April 2017, and it addresses a right size approach based upon the information that Chief Zoludik gave to the Budget Committee last week. As the data comes in from the additional new units, the adjustments to the dispatching center are implemented. These same funds could be used to instead staff 2 ALS medic units if the BLS service does not produce the desired results, or the funds could be used to staff 4 24-hour BLS units if the BLS system proves to be as successful as is hoped, without them needing to do a supplemental budget request. This motion fulfills a deficiency which has been many years in the making and brings the Eugene ambulance capacity up to the minimum necessary for the current population. This motion is fully funded without making any cuts to any department and simply reduces the amount of increases over the adopted FY17 budget. Statements would have been made to the Budget Committee and the level of public support which has been shown for this topic make it clear that bringing the ambulance service capacity up to the minimum recommended level is a priority. I recognize that I am proposing a fairly significant adjustment to the proposed budget, but I cannot stress enough that I'm not proposing making any cuts to any department. I'm simply reducing the amount of proposed increase over what those departments are operating with this year. And the proposed adjustments are only reallocating 5.5% of the additional revenue which the City of Eugene has projected to have over the FY17 budget amount. I would submit to this Budget Committee that the value of the lives which would be positively affected or possibly even saved would, by having the sufficient number of ambulances for our population, ought to be reason enough to seriously consider this motion. Services, while reducing the increase in money to central services by $1 million, for instance, may have an effect, it's more, we're still giving them more than they were operating this current year.
Next we have Councilor Surratt.
Thank you. Well, thank you, John, for your motion and articulating some of the need. So I do want to let folks know I did watch the Budget Committee meetings that I was unable to participate in, so I'm up to speed at least on the conversation. But I will admit I'm not as well versed in this issue on the particulars as others on the committee, such as John just demonstrated. I also want to say I'm not generally one to micromanage our city manager, and I trust that he is looking out for the fiscal health of our city, and he's done an excellent job at that. But this is an issue that has been raised in a very public way, and as Councilor Semple mentioned when she withdrew her version of a similar motion, I believe it deserves consideration in a public forum, whether or not we end up adopting these motions as they are presented right now. I will admit, unlike John's motion, my suggestions for funding are rather vague, and if this motion is formally discussed, I would welcome the good thinking of the members of this Budget Committee on that particular piece. And I also realize that making these proposed additions will require some steady and transition. This is a complex issue, but I simply don't accept what I heard at the meeting the other day, that it would take a full year before this would come to council to initiate a process. I really believe there's an urgency here that needs to speed up that timeline in some way. And I hope that the discussion at this table or a subsequent discussion at the City Council will serve to move us in that direction. I did have a brief discussion with the city manager about my motion, in which he indicated he doesn't believe it's fiscally prudent to take this approach at this point. And I would like to and look forward to giving him a chance to elaborate on that, whether it's at tonight's meeting or when and if either my motion or John's motion is given a second and becomes a formal motion on the table. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our one-time and ongoing, and we're moving into ongoing only, and we have Ken.
Okay, my motion for ongoing is to increase the ongoing allocation to HSC by $125,000. It's currently at $810, and it would put it up to $935 to help fund HSC priority services. HSC, briefly, is an intergovernmental organization. It's comprised of the county, Springfield, and Eugene. It's been in place for more than 25 years. A portion of the HSC funding comes from general fund allocations from those 3 jurisdictions. Several years ago, the city allocation was in the $1.1 million range. It was reduced during the recession. FY16, it was at about $610,000, and last year, the council agreed to increase that amount up to $810,000. My proposal for additional increase this year, I see as a kind of a continuation of restoration of that historical city investment. The funds allocated to HSC are distributed to the local nonprofits. They in turn provide direct support out in the community, addressing homelessness, nutrition, food security, support for at-risk individuals, support for families with children, and veteran services. Couple of points about this. The allocated funds from the jurisdictions are substantially leveraged by these nonprofits, and that means they go out and secure additional state, federal, private funds, and also in-kind support. And this is additional funding and support they might not otherwise be able or receive. A portion of the money is also used to help people who typically need substantial support on an emergency basis, and sometimes be able to help them before it's an emergency and address issues at times proactively, which can reduce time required from police and emergency responders and free them up for other work. I'd also suggest using a multi-agency HSC model to distribute the general funds out into the community through the nonprofits has helped over the long term to create a pretty substantial network of support in our community. It's a long-term investment in expertise and capability out there. I'm proposing reallocation of the $125 from the overall general fund instead of specifying specific program or department. And to provide the manager and staff with flexibility. I think if this is approved, I think they can best determine the specifics of that reallocation. I'm requesting this increase knowing the council hasn't reviewed the HSC allocation in the context of all human service funding by Eugene. And I do have a separate motion to talk to or to encourage that. I plan to make this motion on May 24th. The community need, I think, is substantial. This funding model is effective. Our investment in the network of support is important. It makes substantial difference in many people's lives. Thanks.
Thank you. It concludes our ongoing requests for funding, and we move into a process motion also by Ken.
I'm out of breath.
Take it.
All right. This motion is a process motion. There is no funding involved. Recommends the City Council review the City General Fund allocation to the Human Services Commission. The allocation to HSC, as I've talked about, was reduced in the FY11-16 period as part of larger citywide budget reductions. And as I mentioned earlier, FY17 Budget Committee recommended the council approved an increase in that funding back up to $810,000. That action last year was accompanied by a motion that approved by the Budget Committee that recommended the council review general fund allocation to HSC for ongoing support funding in the context of all overall city human services funding and set a goal to try to increase that back to the 1.1 million level. This proposal to motion that I intend to make makes that same recommendation. And although the review hasn't happened, I do believe, I think there's support for it. I believe it would still be beneficial for the council to review HSC funding levels, review the uses of those funds, and define city objectives for that funding in relation to overall human services work by the city. So, and that one also, I think on May 24th, would intend to make that motion. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to ask the city manager if he wants to weigh in on any of the motions, proposed motions that we have.
Thanks, Scott. I appreciate it. I do, and as you can imagine, the ones that have most concern for me are the ones that include ongoing funding. On the one-time funds, there's a $7 million of Comcast dollars, and I think that's part of what this conversation is around, how to allocate those one-time funds. The ongoing piece, I think, is I would just recommend that we be very fiscally prudent when we think about that. As you know, already we're entering into this budget with a $3 million structural gap that we've said we need to resolve over the next 3 years, and there's many moving parts to that. And so we have recommended $1 million of structural gap closure, but that still leaves $2 million before us. And so that doesn't go away. And so part of it is we've generally, over the last 8 or 9 years, resisted the temptation to actually keep adding to the gap. We've actually tried to work on how to reduce that gap in a very thoughtful way. So I think that's overall for context. I'll first start with the HSC ongoing $125,000. Doesn't feel like a lot, but by the same token, it's ongoing. But even more importantly, the City Council will be having a conversation, a work session on HSC funding in the next weeks and months. And I think it's premature to add more ongoing funding to HSC before the council has made some policy decisions around outcomes that you would like to achieve with social service investments across the board. And so at the end of those conversations, you may choose to add more to an ongoing HSC or some other social service investment. So I would suggest not doing that one, because I just think it's premature to some policy conversations the council will have. It's same with restoring funding to 1.1. The council may want to restore it to 18 million, or they may want to restore it to 0. I don't know what you'll choose to do. But again, I think it's just premature before the council has the policy conversation of how do you want to invest those dollars. So on those. The ongoing ones that really concern me are the 2 fire. And it's interesting, they're sort of similar but different in their approach in how to actually capture $2+ million. I don't think anybody disagrees there's needed capacity in the ambulance services. And I really appreciate the chiefs and Mike Caven's work over the last many months in trying to come up with some innovative ways and new models to actually increase our capacity. And I support that work and I'm very encouraged by that. And, you know, a couple weeks ago, I had a chance to spend some time with some of our fire folks on their exercise around mass casualty incidents, and in conjunction with the police department. We have a marvelous force. I mean, we don't have to worry about that they're undertrained and can't respond. Capacity, yes, but their ability to do their job, no. They do a great job, and we should be proud of that. The basic outcome I think we're all looking for is how do we respond with the needed level of response in a timely manner, and for us, also in a cost-efficient way. And that's the piece for me. The new model has been being discussed for months, not years. And frankly, we don't know what the right mix of ALS and BLS ambulances are, and we don't know what the right mix to be most efficient with 12-hour and 24-hour ambulances. I think there's still more work to do. There's actual data that needs to be collected. And so part of the recommendation that we've talked about is let's do that first. Why not actually collect the information, do the analysis, figure out what we actually need, come back and have the conversation around, based on all of that, how do we move that forward? So that's just part of it. The model is new. And too new to know what is actually needed with those mix. Both of the proposals have very significant service and financial risk, I think, to the organization. And I'm really concerned that we're going to implement a solution with a significant risk that we don't know solves the problem. And so I'll start with the one motion, John, that you proposed, adding $2.3 million of ongoing costs by not increasing portion of the department's general fund. I disagree with you that we're not making cuts to any departments. What it feels like is, yes, all we're doing is we're leaving everybody at status quo and not increasing. The difficulty with that is we're not increasing already as part of our budget any of the materials and supplies. So what that leaves is really personnel costs for the vast majority. Contracts are in place. PERS increases are already foregone conclusions. So those costs automatically increase, and the way you reduce personnel costs is you have to eliminate positions. And so
$2.3 million gap in all those general funds equates to 20 to 25 positions. And so those positions relate to services. We kind of had these conversations over the last many years. And so, for example, the amount of money that you're recommending out of the planning and development really equates to 5 to 7 planners. Now, we've had conversations around, do you need more planners? We've said, yes, we actually need more. So it's going in the wrong direction, because that's what's funded by general fund and PDD. When we talk about LARCs, the library is effectively firewalled off, not legally, but effectively, because we have a levy out there, and what we've told the community is, you're adding services for library services, and they voted for that, and we're doing that. So you effectively now have recreation facilities and recreation services in order to meet their portion of the budget. Recreation services for those amounts really are pools, community centers, and those kinds of things. That's how you have to get to those numbers. When we talk about public works, their general fund is parks maintenance. So when you eliminate 3 or 4 or 5 parks maintenance employees, we're going in the wrong way. We're going the wrong way. We know we need more parks maintenance. So it doesn't make sense to me to keep going in the wrong way in those things. Central services, we're talking about neighborhood, sustainability, community court, HSC funding. We can all have a whole list of things to think about how to do $1 million worth of cuts. So what I'll suggest in this one, if you decide to move forward in a serious way in this, then we will bring back that list of where do you want to get the $2.3 million from. And so we'll ask you to help decide that. So that's, the second one is different, that Claire has submitted. It's not about finding $2 million within the current budget. Let's add $2 million of ongoing cost. And so I think the problems with that, when I mentioned we already have a gap of $3 million we're dealing with, this adds another, the gap will grow to $6 to $7 million in the forecast. And the reason why it's not just a dollar for dollar is the $2 million of increase are personnel costs. And personnel costs like PERS go up much faster than it's a $1 dollar. And so by the time you get through the forecast period, now we're filling a $6 to $7 million gap, not $3 million over the next several years. So I think that's pretty significant. What we've talked about is our reserve for revenue shortfall will fall below 5% within 2 years and be in the red within 3 to 4 years, since we're out of money, depending on how you choose to spend other parts of the Comcast money. And so our savings account is now dry within 3 or 4 years. And the proposal also relies on a very unstable and unproven funding source. You talked about this, being able to capture some additional dollars by renegotiating contracts, essentially, with other providers, which we want to do anyhow. One, that's speculative. Two, at its best, it probably captured $400,000. And so now you're still $1.6 million out. And so that $1.6 million of ongoing funding, again, to fill the gap, we're relating back to sort of what we're now with John's proposal. It's about people and services. And so what that means is that we're now trying to figure out how to reduce services, potentially lay off employees in the out years to fill what is now a $6 or $7 million gap, which is much more significant than the $3 million gap. So it's very difficult. And lastly, if we do pass this, I will suggest that we develop our contingency list when the revenues don't come in to pay for the services. And that will be the same list that we'd present to John. And lastly, the financial statement for our bond rating agencies, it will be a negative impact on our bond rating and our credit rating. And so when we go out to try to issue bonds, if the community chooses to up the road bond or future Parks and Rec bond, there's a good chance that our cost of issuance and our cost of paying back those bonds will go up, because our bond rating and our credit rating actually may decrease based on financial stability. So I think both of them are not good ideas at all. I think it's a huge fiscal risk,
And to me, it doesn't seem like now's the right time to buy something we don't necessarily need with money we don't have. And so I would strongly encourage not going down either one of those roads.
Thank you. We'll now go around the table. We'll begin with Mr. Simple. This is our opportunity to signal support, opposition, or the need for more information about any of the proposed motions, or bring up any motions that may be forthcoming in the next meeting. So we'll begin with you.
Thank you. My first feeling is that we need to keep that Comcast money, or except for my $1 million, where it is, because things are evolving so much, and we really don't know what's going to be the most pressing need. Obviously, it's not big enough, and I feel more comfortable keeping it in the savings account until we know what needs the most urgent funding, whether it's what the seed money does for a shelter or where we get to with City Hall, because we still don't really know what we're going to do. Or if we decide to buy more ambulances or shore up our bridges in case of a earthquake, or get money for that ferry to go back in operation, or 2021, or the railroads. So that's my first thing, is that I hope we will be very cautious with the Comcast money and keep most of it back. Maybe I should put my fire motion back on the table. I would hate to lose the minimum. My biggest concern about money for the fire department is the health of our firefighters. And I'm hearing that they're working 24-hour shifts straight on. Their psychological and physical health is deteriorating, and so they're leaving and not being able to be as effective as we might want, although they still are. So I'm really concerned that we keep our firefighters healthy and here. I like the budget website, and I do think it helps, but I am vehemently against taking even that small amount of money from the neighborhood organizations, newsletters, and communications. I think we need to put a much bigger effort into growing our neighborhood groups, and that requires communication. So just because we didn't use it all this year, I think we still have a really big need there. One of the things I campaigned on was listening to people and encouraging neighborhood associations. So that's my feeling about that. There's no motion to it, but I'm really concerned about parks. I'm getting so much feedback about the garbage and the needles, and that we need nicer parks. So, I kind of like, well, maybe we should put a little Comcast money into one time, get the parks in shape. But we can talk about that later. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
First, I do not think we should take any money from neighborhoods or sister cities. They both need more money instead of less. The ambulances, I think that's more, we just talked today about a quiet zone and spending lots of money for that. Also, employee time has been going into, I don't know how much, but a lot, I think, into studying a quiet zone. Maybe there are things that are more urgent. I do think the ambulance, I believe the firefighters when they say what they need and what they're putting up with, and the dangers involved. As for putting more money into human services, I would much rather put it into a shelter, which is something that's, I don't know how, there are so many different groups doing human services, and I think there are probably overlaps, but at any rate, we know that a shelter, we need a building, we need a place for people to gather, other than the library, and that it has to do with people's comfort as well as the general public's comfort, as well as the health and well-being of the people who are on the streets. I do think that we need to go ahead with City Hall. I think it's ridiculous for not to have a City Hall, and I don't think that when we heard about the one-time money, I thought, well, that's perfect for City Hall. But also part of it would be perfect for building a shelter, which would be a one-time thing. And then later we can get the human services people maybe to volunteer to help with that. But there are lots of people who want to volunteer, but it would be really great if we had a place. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your comments. One of the things that I'm consistently reminded of as I'm going through these things is these are all great ideas, and we have to figure out how to pay for them. And when we look at this budget gap that's looming, that's growing, we're trying to figure out how we can fit all these additional motions for expenses into a framework of this assumed increasing revenue stream, when really we have to count on almost the opposite. We're getting a shrinking relative revenue stream as compared to the fixed expenses that are going up. And then also I think we have this one-time funding source from the Comcast settlement, and so we're sort of packaging a lot of these suggestions as one-time expenses, but it seems apparent that the one-time expenses that we talk about this year are going to be next year's ongoing expenses, and yet we're still having this projected budget gap. So that's concerning to me. So I have a couple of questions to follow up on that. So is it my understanding that based on last week, whenever our presentation was on the ambulance services, that regardless of how much the budget committee recommends to put towards those services, it's really the plan to execute on the analysis of the BLS system before funding any additional ambulances?
What our plan right now is to finish out sort of collecting this data through the rest of the calendar year. Based on that, I think we'll have a really good idea, and there's some other things that go into that, but we have a good idea of the mix of ALS and BLS based on the actual calls that are needed. We have a good sense of, do they need to be 12-hour or 24-hour vehicles, and then what our intent would be is then we invest in actually what we need to meet the need as opposed to guessing and hoping. And so so that's what our intent would be, is to finish that out, come back to the council, have the conversation, and move forward. The problem with ongoing, even if we don't know what that's going to be, that gets built into the budget, and it's built in John's case, we actually need to start reducing something. I think we need to really start having that conversation on what we're going to reduce. On Claire's proposal, it's kind of the same conversation. You're just taking it from a different angle, because I think we need to start thinking about how we're going to start filling a $6 or $7 million gap, because you've created it, regardless if you're just setting aside the money to spend later or not. Fiscally, you've still created the same problem. So I guess the actual, when an ambulance gets bought and when somebody actually staffs the ambulance occurs as the process, but fiscally you're spending potentially more money than you need to spend to get the same service level.
But it's correct me if I'm wrong, but it wouldn't be spent, it would be sitting there available. The savings would come from reductions elsewhere, and then that would be available once your analysis is complete to spend as you see fit. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. So then in addition, well, I guess I don't know if this is a question, but more of a comment. You know, I think that the homeless shelter is a fantastic idea, but I wonder if it's premature to set aside $1 million for it until we get through this feasibility study for how it's going to be funded in an ongoing basis, because I don't think it makes sense to to sort of throw a bunch of money into something if we aren't going to support it in the long term. And so I think until that's determined how that's going to be supported, I think it would be imprudent to set that aside when it could be available to offset whatever debt service might be incurred for the capital projects or whatever that reserve for revenue shortfall will provide. So that's it.
Emily, I just want you to know I'm in favor of where in your heart where that idea comes from, the importance of creating some manner of option, and I'll support that, and I'll be very interested in, as that goes. The reason I won't vote in favor of the motion to set aside $1 million is because I believe that's going to create a public expectation that we'll have a solution within a particular realm of time, and I think that will backfire on us. I like you said, I would prefer for us to go through the process of let's develop a thoughtful solution and then leave this money aside for now so that we have the capacity to implement it once we know more about what the solution is. I'll vote against yours like the manager said because of the fact that this requires a larger conversation about council's relative role in HFC with the other organizations. For us to spend 6 times the amount of money, I mean, I'm in favor of the program, the first motion, with regard to the overnight stay when it's cold. I'm very much in favor. But for us to spend 6 times as much as the county and 6 times as much as Springfield seems disproportionate to me to the appropriate percentage of responsibility. So I want to have that conversation first and a couple others about responsibility with some of those agencies before I'm ready to vote on that particular one. Josh's motion, yeah, you bet, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. I would probably vote in favor of Claire's motion, but not Josh's. And Mr. Manager, you've done an exceptional job steering the ship over the last, your entire tenure, getting us to a responsible and a safe footing. And your job is to make sure the ship operates properly and keeps operating well. My job is to say, based on my constituents, this is a direction I want the ship to go. When you said that we shouldn't spend money we don't have for something we don't really need.
I didn't say we don't.
Yeah, you used better terms than I just did. I'm sorry, what did you?
What I said is it doesn't seem like we should be spending money on something we don't know what we need yet.
Right.
With money we don't have.
See, that's the value piece for me where I say my job is to tell you I sense that there is a much higher value for those things, and I'd rather be safe than sorry. When it comes to first responders and their well-being doing the job and what we need in order for them to operate efficiently, I'd much rather be safe than sorry. Theirs is job one, period. Not even close for me.
And I'm not arguing that point. I think the piece for me is what is it that you need? And so I use downtown in comparison.
And if I could, I'll say I would rather put in place what I think we've learned so far is the potential need and study it and do exactly what you said and adjust it as we go. And I'm fine with that. But for me, one of the things that I have a problem with using where we're going, the $6 or $7 million hole is I voted against putting the library levy out. I was the only one that did. And it was because of exactly what you said. We've walled that off now. We can't cut that because of what we've done. And this is a much higher priority service to the community. So I have more to say. Would you put me in for another round if we have them? Josh.
All right, thank you. Yeah, a lot to cover here, and let me just apologize in advance. I will, to go watch kids, have to depart early in a little bit. A quick clarifying question. John, you mentioned offhand on the pavement preservation measure, you were talking about that linked to our bond rating, but I thought that was a pay-as-you-go mechanism. That wouldn't be. Would the cost of doing that still be affected by our bond rating?
I would assume so.
Is that right? Am I missing?
It is actually. Can you hear me? Okay. It is actually a bond measure, but we do it in a way that looks like a pay-as-you-go funding, but we borrow money to do that, yes.
And so if we did something that impacted our bond rating, it would make that more expensive?
Yes.
Okay, just clarification. Thank you. And I hope we have a chance to come back and talk about the pavement preservation measure more later. I really appreciate the notes of fiscal caution. I appreciate the care with which the city manager laid all that out. I'll just say I'm going to signal my intent to second one of the motions on the ambulance measure and vote for that. I think you put it best, Mike, better safe than sorry. I also don't see another way to give it sufficient urgency in this budget cycle. Maybe we don't spend all the money. You figure out how to optimize it. You do the more careful consideration. But it's fast-tracked, and then there are resources to act on it. So I don't see another way to act on that. I realize that creates tension with other parts of the budget, but that's my intent right now. A couple of other quick things. Just on human services funding, I think I agree with the need for a review. If there were some way to fund at least the dusk to dawn measure, I heard a lot about that from people when I went door to door. So that seems like something that feels more urgent to me, but it has to be set in the context of broader efforts. But I'll just say that I would at least be supportive of that. Let me shamelessly make 3 quick notes on my own motion while you're asking. But these are things I didn't get to. So I appreciate the comments on the Sister Cities program and the neighborhood associations funding that I supported last year. But I want to be clear. If you don't like those sources and you like budget transparency and accountability, then please suggest something else. I sent this motion out 8 days ago, Councilors Semple and Taylor, so there's been plenty of time to suggest an alternative. So to me, not suggesting an alternative feels like you're undermining an effort for budget transparency and accountability. And that's something I heard a lot about at the door last year. So please suggest an alternative if you have one. Second, this may not be obvious, so I'll just tell you I actually called staff at the City of Redmond and asked them how much it costs to implement this measure. This is very much at the high end. What I think actually you'll be able to do it for less than half of what I suggested, both in one-time and ongoing costs. So just to be optimistic. And finally, I can't believe I didn't mention this before, but just to sort of put it out there, I put a little online petition together. I was hoping, just at the scale of the public comment that we get, I was hoping to get 10 or maybe 20 people, 30 people to sign. I have 100 signatures, actually literally exactly 100. I just got the 100th a couple hours ago in favor of this. So I encourage you to, when you think about supporting this, put that number of 100 people in context of the number of people we've had actually show up for budget in the past.
Thank you. So since I'm kind of playing catch up and wasn't able to participate in prior conversations, I'm not necessarily going to speak to every motion and what I'm supporting and what I'm not. But I do appreciate and would support Councilor Semple's motion to set aside $1 million from the Comcast settlement to provide initial seed money, whether that's for the ongoing permanent shelter conversation or, as Councilor Zelinka had mentioned, to make sure we have emergency services going into next winter. I do want to point out that the City of Eugene has 3 representatives on the Human Services Commission. A member of the Budget Committee, in this case Ken Beeson, myself, and Greg Evans. So we do actually have quite a bit of influence on that body in terms of how that money is programmed and what the priorities are and how the City of Eugene is considered as the HSC money is pooled and distributed. So I also appreciate Ken's motion to remind us to have a review of not only our HSC allocation, but our other human services funding, and look at that in a comprehensive way, because we do have our own city priorities as well as the money that we program for the Human Services Commission. Regarding the Comcast settlement, obviously there are a number of viable and important places we might program this money. I support the city manager's proposal to put a significant amount into if I correct, the reserve for revenue shortfall. But we might end up reducing that amount a little bit, given the other good ideas that are being floated for the use of those funds. I also agree with my councilors who spoke to the use of these funds for City Hall. I think it's a very appropriate use of the unanticipated one-time funding. We need to have a City Hall. It should not be an either this or that conversation. We are the 2nd largest city in the state, getting ready to host one of the largest sports events in the world. We need an actual City Hall, not couch surf, as my fellow councilor Pryor mentioned at the meeting the other night. I also want to appreciate John Borofsky's suggestion that we consider some of that Comcast settlement for the quiet zone, which we had a work session on earlier today. I think that's a worthy idea and might alleviate some of the concerns some councilors mentioned today about using a road bond for this purpose. And finally, I appreciate the city manager's response regarding the ambulance funding and Josh and Mike's thoughts about it. It seems like another Hobson's choice, these valuable services versus these valuable services. I don't wish to put our fiscal future in jeopardy, but I believe we need an expedited process to figure out a solution. It feels that we are approaching a crisis in this area, if not already in one, and I could see from the reaction of the rank and file firefighters in the room that they feel this is a crisis situation. I think it might be necessary to provide the city manager leeway on how it gets implemented, as Councilor Clark mentioned, but I think it needs to get done.
Thank you. Garrett, are you joining us? Okay. John?
All right. Try to catch this real quick. So all the studies, I don't think, disagree. They all state we need actual more ELS units now. I mean, there's no question about that. Whether it's a mix of BLS or ALS, that can be adjusted over time. But really now is the question is, how much, what are we willing to do? What are we willing to step up and what adjustments are we going to make? How much worse do we want this situation to become before we commit to start funding it? To propose waiting for longer for these studies to be done and to try this, okay, we'll try one 12-hour thing out for a little bit. That just pushes the problem further down the road and is going to just make the pain of the necessary changes even worse. Now, I take exception, and I think to say that I'm proposing cutting 20 or 25 positions, I think that's a tremendous assertion. I am only talking about an adjustment of 5% of the additional funds over what we're talking about from last year, or from our current year. So 95% of the additional money we have should cover some of the extra contract costs, the extra PERS increases, everything else. We're talking a pretty small percentage to make a pretty big impact in people's lives. Yes, while reducing the increase in money to central services by $1 million may have an effect upon some of the services which they're hoping to add next year, my motion is still allocating over $400,000 more than what they are currently working with this year. And I would hope that that $400,000 could help cover some of those costs that increase year by year. I don't dispute they do. To say that we're going the wrong way, yes, we're going the wrong way. But I think the question of the wrong way is we're going the wrong way in having this be a priority and neglecting our core services. We haven't added this. We had 20 years ago, we had 4 ALS. Now we have 3. We have double the call volume. We're going the wrong way in that regard. We have to recognize and be willing to make that adjustment and start dealing with this. The pain of this would have been a lot less had we been dealing with this appropriately for the last 20 years. Real fast, see if I can catch this. I support Ken Benson's one time. Thank you, Emily. I hope we get at least a minimum something or other. The $1 million of the seed money for the homeless, I think it's a much bigger problem. I think we definitely need to do the one-time dusk till dawn things, but the bigger problems are, why don't you put me in the queue?
Councilor Pryor.
Thank you. You could look at this as avoiding talking about the merits of the different proposals, because I could say they all have merit. I think all these proposals have merit. So instead, everybody can roll their eyes. I'm going to put on my process hat. And I've heard values talked about. I've heard priorities talked about. And as a process question, who establishes the values and priorities for the city of Eugene? It is the elected officials. And there are right now 7, but normally there's 8. They establish the policies which are a reflection of the values and priorities of the city, not the budget committee. The Budget Committee contains half members who were not elected. They walked in and sat down by appointment, and it is not the role of the Budget Committee to establish values and priorities of the City of Eugene. So some of this conversation is critically important to have. I will not dispute that. But that conversation needs to occur before the elected body, the City Council. And so I think those conversations need to occur, and they need to be moved and discussed, and solutions need to be recommended by the City Council as a matter of priority and value. And so I become nervous when the Budget Committee reallocates significant amounts of ongoing money which is related to values and priorities of the city as a non-elected, non-representative body. And I know people are going to go, wait a minute, I got on the Budget Committee so I could have an influence on where the city goes and what the city does. No, we ran for office and got elected so that we could be the people that decide what the values and priorities of the city are. So while I appreciate the merits of what's being proposed here, I think everything that's being proposed is a great idea. I think those great ideas need to be considered by the City Council with all due speed, because none of us have the expertise or the qualification to second guess what the operational needs of the City of Eugene are. Is it 25 positions? Is it not 25 positions? I'm not going to get into that debate because the staff knows that, not me. I am not an expert at what it takes to run the City of Eugene, or its priorities or its values. So I'm just getting passionate about the fact that I'm a big process person, because I think we are judged by the way we do things. And if we do things in a way that looks like someone can come in and have an influence over the operation of the City of Eugene without being elected to that job, it can have an erosion of trust and confidence. Well, anybody can come in and sit down and start reallocating money. I appreciate the enormously important job the Budget Committee does, but you have to work within the parameters of what the Budget Committee is supposed to be doing.
Jill?
To dovetail, if that is necessary, on Councilor Pryor's comment, for the reasons that he articulated, I would leave HSC funding, including the shelter, and ongoing resources for a discussion of the City Council. And I think everyone agrees that HSC is important. A homeless shelter is a great idea. I'm a big proponent of the Urban Renewal Fund and what we're doing downtown, but as we're making the city better for a large part of our population, the population that may be displaced in that deserves attention as well. So, but I leave that to the City Council to decide those issues. Fire, I'm going to say, you know, I've sat here, I mean, in the Budget Committee for several years now, and we've made some really, really hard cuts as to personnel. And although it sounds like 5%, how could possibly 5% equal 25 people? If the city manager says it does, it does. And that has been proven by the credibility that he has brought forth in the budget over the years. I would say we don't want to rob Peter to pay Paul. I mean, I sat here and we pushed, this committee pushed the fire chief last week, okay? And the union representative the fire chief was pushed. Wouldn't you rather us save a couple of millions of that Comcast money for you? Wouldn't you rather us do this and that? And the chief repetitively said no. And his rationale, which as I understood it, was that they're going to put that BLS unit out. If we could get $500,000, if Councilor Semple put her motion back, I would support it, to support at one-time funding for the $500,000, and then the study, because he's not only talking about the costs of fire, there's revenue for fire. So after the report is done, they're going to be able to have that information again for the council, and then the council can determine what the priority is and the policy regarding fire. So the other thing I'd like to mention with fire is something that really struck me is regarding the responsiveness from Eugene and Seattle, 51% cardiac arrest survival in Eugene compared to 51 in Seattle. So I think, well, it sounds to me that everyone agrees there's a capacity issue. The work that's being done sounds fabulous. So when people, I think we've got to be careful that because of capacity, people are dying and not getting services they need. It sounds like we're doing a phenomenal job with that. So again, budget and need, we have to use our resources wisely, not only wisely, but at the correct time. And what I'm hearing the city manager say is by taking $2 million and putting it, holding it back, then we're basically denying opportunities that we could be using the money for. Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate what Councilor Pryor said, and I agree with it. So I want to be careful here because I'm still in favor of my motion. But I want to acknowledge that. I also appreciate what the city manager said, and the idea of speaking to my motion on the increasing the ongoing funding. I know full well there's a tension there between increasing that and the idea that the council hasn't yet had this HSC objectives discussion. So I think I need to think about that a bit, but I'm still kind of holding on to those. I do feel pretty strongly the dusk to dawn, the one-time funding. I guess a couple of quick comments on that one. It's one-time funding, and I think it's consistent with the role of a budget committee member to make a motion like that. In response to Councillor Clark, I don't run the systems over there at the county, so I've got to be careful saying I know exactly how they work and the analysis systems they use. But the best information I have is that those proportions are set by where the services are used and where the homeless occurs. So that jumped out at me too, that the disparity between those two numbers, but it's my information is it's intended to be proportionate to where the need is. Another couple of quick comments on Josh. I support Josh's motion. I did find as I read through it, and he's gone. I also don't like the idea of taking from the neighborhood and from the sister cities funds. I'm pretty partial to those. I'm also, it's a relatively small amount that he's talking about, and I actually think it's most prudent if we get to a point where we agree to make the recommendation that you'd let the manager and the staff figure out how best to take that money out. I mean, you called it freeboard, I think. I don't know if there is any freeboard, but as opposed to us sitting around the table, I think that's part of what you were saying, to try to find 5,000 here and 4,000 there. I can't do that. So I support his motion, but would, I think, look to the staff. I don't know about the ambulance. I guess I tend to go to a place where on that, when you get into this sort of thing, where I defer to the staff and I defer to the professionals and the people who really looked at this. So when I hear, gosh, maybe we need to finish gathering the data, and then we're going to be in a position to make a recommendation. We recognize the issue and so on. I tend to want to go there. So that's my comment.
Thank you. I would support the Dawn to Dusk program. I think that it's a very important the budget transparency tool as well. I think that looking through the materials, it's sometimes overwhelming and it's hard to figure out. And some of the tools that are available out there are make it easy for everyone to understand and where the money's allocated. The ambulance, I would encourage Councilor Semple to place our motion back on the table for further discussion. I think this is an important topic, and there's more work and discussion around that motion. And then finally, looking at the shelter, it's something that we need. However, keeping more money in the reserve for revenue shortfall fund, I think, is important as we move forward. We have a number of different studies moving forward now. We have a public safety study, we have the human services, and now even the fire is doing a study. And this would allow us to potentially have money later on once we have the results of those studies and act on it. I think if we act now and we don't know what's coming at us later, it kind of ties our hands as to what we can do in the future. And that also puts us down a little ways down the road for we can better forecast that budget shortfall that's coming. And so those are my thoughts. And we'll go to the queue, and I think we have Councilor Clark first, followed by John, and then Councilor Taylor.
First thing I want to do is split hairs with my friend Chris. For years, in my first part of my service on council, one of the things I used to argue for all the time was that I thought we should have a priority-setting retreat of council in advance of budget time. Boy, I used to beat the table for that. And every time I did, Councilor Zelenka would beat twice as hard that the process of setting the budget is the city's priority setting now. I think that, first of all, it's important to distinguish that the budget committee doesn't make policy. Not just that they shouldn't, they don't. They only recommend to the council, and only the council has the ability to do it when we vote to accept what the committee has recommended or not. So I believe that it's okay for them to talk about the value, as it relates to policy, and talk about what they think the role of the city government is in people's lives and how our policies play out in the services that we deliver. I think that their appropriate role, like the police commission adds community values to how the police do their job. I think the budget committee members add a sense of our community's values to how we spend our money. And I think that's okay for them to weigh in on policy. But when they vote and say, this is what we're going to do, the council has the full ability to reject 100% what the committee said.
They don't.
Yeah, they do. The
10%.
The council can, when it adopts the budget, has the capacity to do so and to supplementally do so after the fact 6 months later, like we always
has
did.
a clarification.
So let me just say, my point is we have the final authority for that discussion. Now, let me, but I understood your point, which is don't get too far down that road. I would say that the better safe than sorry comment was directed towards the idea that if there's a problem with the quiet zone, if there's a problem with how we're doing parks, these are all important topics that the city deals with, parks maintenance, all of the facets of things we deal with. But if my daughter's turning blue and it takes 26 minutes to get an ambulance there, that's more important than anything else this city does. And I will prioritize it over everything, every time. So for me, that just is a different level of analysis about what's important.
Thank you. Thank you. John?
Thank you. I'll try to be quick. Councilor, sorry, I appreciate it, whether yours goes through or mine happens to go through. My issue is not so much specifically the exact dollars from which department. It's more, we've got to fix this bigger problem. It represents a couple $1 million any way you cut it, whether it's BLS, ALS, whatever. We have to fix this problem. And so whoever gets a second, I'm in support of that. Ken, I'm great with the one-time funds, but the ongoing for the homelessness, for the health shelters, I think there's a bigger question than whether it's the HSC discussions to happen. That's all. There's a lot of factors, mental health, substance abuse, all those different things, from an ongoing question. Support Josh's website proposal. The funding source may not be the best, but I think it's a good idea. As a response to Chris, I got to say, I kind of agree with Mike. You are correct. I don't dispute that at all, that council makes policy decisions. I've gotten some, let's say, mixed messages as far as what how much say I should be, asking questions, or how many comments I ought to be making. But I do think that the Budget Committee is a very important part of the process, that having balance and citizen involvement and open and frank discussions about what's important to the members of the community, both the constituents that elected you and the community at large, is important. And that the Budget Committee shouldn't just be a rubber stamp committee for the City Council. It's having these discussions, ultimately come back to influence what policies you enact.
Councilor Taylor.
Thank you. Well, just now occurs to me that something I've thought before, that council needs to have a discussion about the function of the Budget Committee at some point, and I think
You think?
I think we need to make it clear. If I were appointed to the Budget Committee, I would be confused about what I was supposed to do, and I think that we need to have a discussion about that, and a discussion about how we tell people what they're here for. But one thing I had hoped the Budget Committee would do is help us think of ways to get more revenue. And I know that the person sitting across from me has mentioned that a number of times, and you were very quiet about it this year. But I think this is something that they could really help us try to think about. If we're so short of money, we obviously need new sources of revenue. We also need to consider the marijuana revenue that we're going to be getting. I don't know if we seem to be ignoring that, and I'm sure we're going to be getting a fair amount of money from that. I keep saying hotel tax, help the people who use our facilities, let them help pay. But there are probably other ideas that some of you might come up with. But the one-time money, I think City Hall was a perfect use for that, but a shelter building is another perfect use. The building would be a one-time thing. That's not the same thing as services, which are ongoing, but a building is a one-time and a perfect use for one-time money. As for Josh's saying that we should, I don't think we have to tell you how to fund your motion. That was, and about the percentage of homeless people, I think we have more people because in Springfield they say go to Eugene. And it's really a community, it's a wider thing than just Eugene, the problem of mentally ill people and people who are homeless for other reasons. And I don't think that we should pay, because more of them end up on our streets, I don't think we should pay for most of the services. Thank you.
Councilor Pryor.
Viola, could you tell me what happens if the City Council rejects the Budget Committee's recommendation?
Yes. So if the council can reject a motion or reduce the amount of a motion without additional process. However, if you're going to reduce or increase expenditures, if it's over 10%, we would need additional process. So you would have to have an additional public hearing and then 10 days of legal ad and all of those sorts of things if you're increasing the budget. But you can reduce or strike a motion without additional process at the council.
As a kind of like a line item, an individual motion that was made during the Budget Committee proceedings.
Correct.
Can be stricken.
Correct.
Okay. I thought the 10% was overall, but it's only on an increase.
Correct.
Okay. That's very important to know because, in defense of the Budget Committee, you want to be able to believe that the Budget Committee has a authoritative role. This says it's more advisory role. That puts a different complexion on it. It says that the City Council is still exercising the authority and you're advising the City Council. That's helpful. But what it says is the ultimate policy decision will be made by the City Council. We're back to the elected officials. So my level of anxiety is lower, but now the level of relevance for the Budget Committee also, at least in my mind, goes from being an authoritative body to being an advisory body. And I kind of liked it when it was authoritative body, because I felt that that helped transparency. It helped, you know, governance. To now know the Budget Committee has more of an advisory role than an authoritative role. As an elected official, I might go, that's great, I like that. But it kind of does create, as Councilor Taylor says, the need for us to have a conversation about what the role of the Budget Committee is, so that we can be much more deliberate about how we go about doing the things that we do. So that was very helpful for me, and hopefully it will guide how we talk. But my basic point about how policy and priorities are set, this actually supports that, and maybe creates a better context for what we're doing. But and then also, just quickly, I like the idea of the money for shelter. As you know, it was something I was recommending 2 or 3 months ago. It was the Budget Committee where we should put our money where our mouth is. So I'm supportive, figuring out a way to do it in such a way that we don't promise to build it unless we get the support of the other partners who would be involved in operation. But I like the idea of identifying to demonstrate our commitment. With regard to ambulance service, I also think the one-time commitment of money to purchase equipment is a great one, but I would like to have more conversation about how that would be realized in terms of the operational aspects, simply because I don't feel smart enough to know what the operational aspects should be. So however we want to kind of parse that would be helpful for me. And then with regard to the website, I don't have a problem with that necessarily, but if we're confusing the website with greater engagement, it ain't going to do that job.
Yeah, that's right.
So this website is not an engagement tool. We need to talk, maybe not in this forum, but some other one, about how are we really going to do engagement? Because if I pick up the phone and call the city, I want to be able to get an answer back. That, to me, is responsiveness and engagement, not how. Now, the website's great, but we need more than that to be effective.
Yes, so.
Public service officer, is that what you're trying to say?
Thank you. Jill?
So I wanted to follow up, dusk to dawn, the one-time money, I would support that. Josh's website proposal, so I think overall I support it. It's just there's so many unfunded needs that it seems on some level very important for people to be able to see easily what the budget is, and on some level it has a low priority. However, I actually think to the issue of engagement, because, you know, transparency to me, you know, transparency is in the eye of the beholder, of course, and then based on a lot of other burden, and that are basically low, make a huge difference to the city. City Hall is important. I wholeheartedly support the city manager's recommendation to leave that, put that in the City Hall fund. And finally, I have a process question. So if Councilor Semple pulls her motion off for the 500, for the fire, can we just replace that, or is there a process that we could put it back now?
There are no motions out there right now. These are
oh, no, oh, right.
proposed
So we could just go ahead, if she pulls it?
I could put it back.
Would you?
Nothing's been put on yet. It was just a preview.
Oh, got it. Oh, I see what you're saying. Got it.
Or you could put it on.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Councilor Surratt.
Thank you. So Chris had Twyla answer one of the questions I was going to ask about what happens when the Budget Committee's recommendation comes to council. I do think, you know, all of our boards and commissions are advisory to the council. They make recommendations. They study an issue. They make recommendations to the council. The council chooses to accept those recommendations or not. So this body operates in very much the same way. And I've appreciated how seriously and how, with how much scrutiny the current Budget Committee members have taken this job seriously. Not that past ones haven't. I was a member of the Budget Committee for many years. But I don't worry about non-elected members of the Budget Committee overstepping their bounds because the elected officials are here to say, no, that's our purview. So, so I think that there's protection there against, you know, mission creep, so to speak. And then I also want to point out on the ambulance services, the city manager's draft budget, if I'm correct, does provide funding for 12 hours of BLS, a one-time expenditure of $250,000 for that. Is that correct, city manager? Yeah. So Councilor Semple's motion would add a little bit more, but there is already some baseline funding to bring that up a little bit. So I don't want that to get lost in this larger conversation. Thank you.
Councilor Clark.
Thank you. One of the things that I mentioned real quickly and too quickly was my support for Josh's motion. And he's not here to go into it a little more. I'm not sure I agree with his offsets for how to pay for it entirely yet, but it's such a small amount. I believe that dollar for dollar, that's one of the smartest things we can support at this table this time around, and here's why. One of the things that I learned after a while serving on council was some of the stuff I thought I knew turns out wasn't set up in the budget the way it actually is. And I think that the more we make that sort of information available and simple to access and simple for people to read and simple for them to understand, the less we have information flow difficulties with the general public. One of the things we run into frequently at council and talk about frequently is, how we need to educate the public about whatever the issue actually is. One of the things, for example, is that people may agree with me very much, and I sense they would, about the value of ambulance service as opposed to other city services. That also has to be balanced off against the notion that the general fund support for fire and EMS is a number that's larger than just about any other number in the budget, as opposed to, say, Public Works, which, is a tiny little number like this. Now, their overall budget is large, but what city general funds go towards is incredibly small, so there's a proportional scale thing. The importance of having an innovative website where people can dive in as deep as they want to understand the city's budget on their own time and in their own way is because it helps with that public education of understanding the relative scale of issues really well. And so I think if we're an innovation city, if that's the central proud piece of our local culture, then our city's communications should reflect that. So I think it's very important. And by the way, with the last 37 seconds, I will say that we could stop paying $1 million a year in rent if we just bought the eWeb building. But anyway, that's that.
John?
Yeah, I think I really appreciate the discussion or the introduction of the discussion about additional revenue sources. I think equally, if not more important, is a real clear understanding that I don't feel I have at this point about what the net benefit is to some of these investments in homelessness and other human services can offer to the city. We received a number of comments from members of the staff at Shelter Care, and I went on their website, and I know that they have a statistic there that I don't know how they come up with it, but if there's truth to it, there's a net benefit to investing in services like that to offset a greater cost savings to other city services. I'd be interested in knowing where that diminishing marginal return hits a point of balance. And if we can make an investment of X dollars here that's going to save X plus some percentage elsewhere and free up a net benefit of funds, I think that's a worthwhile discussion and doesn't require any additional taxes, but can free up resources.
Thank you. We have reached the end of the queue. Is there any other questions, comments as we go into the next round? Okay. So we have some work ahead of us for the next meeting. As you can see, we have some motions that we need to prepare and finesse a little bit. So if you have a motion to be considered for the May 24th meeting, please submit that by May 18th at 5 p.m. And that way I will meet with city staff on the 19th and we'll go through those and determine the order in which they will vote on those. And we'll make sure you have a copy of those before the meeting. And that way you can do your research and decide on how you want to vote. You have the ability, there are no motions out there, these were just proposed motions, so if there's any new motions or any other items you want to bring to the table, we do have the full day or full evening on the 24th. So I think Councilor Saray, you have
More planners.
Excuse me, just a process request as someone who's missed her share of budget committee meetings and was able to catch up by watching the online thing. Could we make sure that both Councilor Evans and Councilor Zelinka know the 18th deadline that you've proposed? Thank you.
We'll also make sure Garrett knows. Anything else? With that, we're adjourned.
All right.
Betty, what did you say, 10 minutes after 8? Isn't that what you said?
Well, and I'm not,
Oh, good.
and that's my.
Get to go home.
That was good.